Afghanistan criticizes neighboring Pakistan for allowing a Taliban delegation to visit Islamabad and condemns the insurgent group as terrorists. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani is taking a hard stand against the Taliban after April's deadly suicide attack in Kabul. Nearly 70 people were killed and more than 300 injured when Taliban fighters blew up an explosives-rigged truck and opened fire inside a government building. During a joint session of parliament, President Ghani demanded Pakistan evict Taliban insurgents through military action or hand them over to Kabul for trial.
We want Pakistan to fulfill its commitments based on what was discussed in quadrilateral summits and launch military operations against those who, based on our, international and Pakistan's own words, have centers in Pakistan.
Pakistani officials have engaged in efforts to broker peace talks with the Taliban. Since the last meeting in February, the group has refused to participate and has begun another spring offensive. We begin our coverage right now with CCTV's Daniel Khan in Islamabad. And Daniel, how has the Pakistani leadership responded to these demands from Afghan President Ashraf Ghani?
Well, Anand, the Foreign Office has rejected the allegations, saying that Pakistan does not differentiate between terror groups, and Pakistan condemns all forms of terrorism, and it is committed to fight it, saying that Pakistan itself is the biggest victim of terrorism, in which thousands of security personnel have sacrificed their lives. Now, the Foreign Office said that Pakistan is making serious efforts for peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan, but Pakistan alone is not responsible for bringing the Taliban back to the negotiating table. Is already fighting in the northwestern region in a major operation. Now, according to Army, 90% of areas have been cleared. Now, experts say when terrorists flee to Afghanistan, it is the duty of their military who have been trained by the ISAF and NATO forces to capture them, saying that incompetence of their security forces should not be blamed on Pakistan.
And Daniel,
Yes,
that meeting, Daniel, between the Taliban delegation and the Pakistani government, what can you tell us about that?
Well, the Pakistan Foreign Office has denied this meeting. Reportedly, a three-member delegation of the Afghan Taliban was in Pakistan to negotiate the release of prisoners, issues regarding Afghan refugees, and some problems about frontier areas. Now, experts say that at a time when Pakistan is trying to bring the Taliban on the negotiating table, Afghan president's remarks have closed the chapter of Pakistan's role in the reconciliation with the Taliban. And some officials say that since President Ghani no longer wants to seek the reconciliation process with the Taliban, Pakistan should also respect Kabul's decision and avoid any kind of an intervention. But expert policy of confrontation with Pakistan will not be beneficial for both the countries and for the region.
Thanks, Daniel. That's CCTV's Daniel Khan reporting from Islamabad. Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Omar Samad. He's a South Central Asia analyst and former Afghan ambassador to France and Canada. Also with us is Hassan Abbas. He's a senior advisor and fellow at the US-based Asia Society and the author of The Taliban Revival. And we're also joined by Michael Kugelman. He's a senior associate for South and Southeast Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars here in Washington. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining me. Ambassador Samad, let me start with you. President Ghani is angry. He's angry with the Pakistanis for hosting that meeting between the Taliban and the Pakistani government. How serious is this rupture in the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan?
It's serious, not the first. We've seen over the years, President Ghani has invested a lot of political stock in trying to open the doors to negotiations through Pakistan, hoping that Pakistan, and of course its military, which plays an important role in fighting terrorism or allowing sanctuaries on Pakistani soil, to play a more positive and constructive role over the past year and a half. And what President Ghani is expressing now is sentiments across Afghanistan. The Afghan people who have paid so heavily are very tired and very dismayed by the continued violence that they are facing and experiencing almost on a daily basis across different provinces of Afghanistan. And the president obviously has no choice but to backtrack from his forward policy towards Pakistan and bring some calibration and recalibrate, not only to satisfy the Afghan population's wishes for a more robust position towards Pakistan, but also to reevaluate the peace overtures that he has made.
Hassan, what is the Pakistani view on this? Do the Pakistanis believe that there is a negotiated way out of this? And can they really negotiate while at the same time tolerate the kinds of attacks that we were talking about there that we saw in Kabul?
The real challenge here is that for Pakistan, this is not only a Pakistan-Afghanistan issue or the Pakistani Taliban and Afghan Taliban issue. For the Pakistani establishment, if I may call that, which means the Pakistani military and intelligence, it's a triangle. Triangle has three corners with Pakistan, Afghanistan and India. So the Pakistani expectation has been that we will bring, or we will try our level best to bring Taliban on the negotiating table, provided Afghanistan cuts its ties with India or what they perceive to be the Indian influence. And that has been such a central theme that it has colored Pakistan's view. And Pakistan has unfortunately not learned that by not going against Afghan Taliban with their full force, it is hitting them back, because the Afghan Taliban have links with Al-Qaeda, Haqqani group, which is operating in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but Haqqani group has now taken over almost the command of the Afghan Taliban. We have heard from various studies, various news reports, the Afghan Taliban now have appointed Siraj Haqqani as their deputy. He's almost the #2 man. So Pakistan has paid a heavy price for this selective policy. They have done very well, I must say, against Pakistani Taliban. They have cleared the Waziristan area, but Afghan Taliban are not on their main hit list. And that the reason is that vision of a triangle.
Right. Let me ask you this very quickly, Hassan. You're saying that there's some linkage here between how the Pakistanis deal with the Afghan Taliban and the relationship between Afghanistan and India. I mean, are they relevant?
To this extent that Pakistan thinks that Afghanistan is in their backyard, there is no direct border between Afghanistan and India, and the Indian influence in Afghanistan, that Pakistan feels threatened. Pakistan feels insecure, like in some ways, if there's a comparison, like Israel. They feel that India is trying to encircle them. And they feel that India, by getting close to Afghanistan, is ultimately going to allow the Pakistani dissidents, the Baloch, the others, to find space in Afghanistan, and there's a history to it. I think they overread the challenge. They have been mistaken lately, but that's what provides them this lens.
All right. Michael, here we have this delegation from Qatar, from Doha, Taliban delegation, go to Pakistan, hold these talks. The Pakistanis made it clear that this was from the political office of the Taliban, as they put it. Do you believe that the Taliban is acting in good faith here?
No, not necessarily. I wouldn't put much stock into it at all. The Taliban has never indicated a serious desire to want to negotiate with peace. And why should they want to? They're doing so well on the battlefield. They're scoring some major tactical victories. So why quit when you're ahead? I think that's probably the thinking of the Taliban. So what we've seen in terms of these reports of meetings over the last few days, I wouldn't put much stock in it. These meetings always happen. And I think we need to look at the broad picture, and that's that the Taliban is on the offensive. Why would it have an incentive to come talk about peace, of all things, when it's doing so well on the battlefield, doing anything but promote peace? I think that's the bottom line.
Right, Ambassador, as Michael points out, the Taliban is on the offensive right now. We had the temporary fall of Kunduz province a short while ago. Media reports tell us that they are in control of significant parts in the south, in Helmand province. What is the security situation right now?
I would describe it as much more fluid than that. It is not, yes, for a while we saw Taliban showing some vigor and strength, and that was because for the past 3 to 4 years, they have been able to reestablish themselves, move people around, move equipment around, be pushed from Pakistan into Afghanistan. Those elements are also somewhat allied with the Afghan Taliban. There's a nexus that is at work across Afghanistan between different outfits that are, some are Afghan, some are not Afghan at all, or Pakistani, Arab, and a amalgam of others. So what we are seeing in the past couple of weeks is tactical setbacks incurred by and experienced by the Taliban. We are seeing major attempts by the Afghan forces and a new, I think probably Ashraf Ghani's speech has somewhat reinvigorated the spirit, of the fighting spirit of the Afghan National Security Forces. What I'm seeing is some very heavy casualties on the Taliban side. Now, I want to say one word about what Professor Abbas said. This triangle, from the Afghan perspective, it lacks one angle. And that is the Indian angle, in our view, is a mirage. It is a mirage because India, first of all, has had relations with Afghanistan for centuries. Number two, India's presence in Afghanistan is not a military presence, except for very small amounts of maybe buying certain equipments for the Afghan army. Very small, negligible compared to everything that everybody else is doing. Thirdly, most of its aid to Afghanistan to the tune of $2 billion is for civilian and reconstruction projects in Afghanistan. I think that the Pakistanis obviously have to have always some kind of scapegoat to justify their very well understood now, very well established policy in Afghanistan, trying to undermine Afghanistan. And also, Afghanistan is not a backyard to anyone. Never was a backyard, and I don't think that the Pakistani establishment should look at Afghanistan as its backyard vis-a-vis India. If they have problems with India, they should deal with India and let Afghanistan, be a normal friend to Pakistan.
Hassan, is India a pretext?
Partly, but there is another perspective as well. I mean, look at the old Afghan jihad years. India was on the side of the Soviet Union. India, every major resolution that was brought into the UN, India was with Soviet Union. Pakistan, United States, and other countries were on one side. The Pakistani intelligence categorically says that they have found that Baloch leaders, who are dissident leaders, were found in Afghanistan. So there are issues. I will not just take out India from the picture. However, the Pakistani view, the Pakistani establishment's view, is a very exaggerated view. There's no doubt about it. And the real issue, I think, here are twofold. One is governance issue. Both Pakistan and Afghanistan have terribly failed in their governance issues. Pakistan has not been able to establish its writ in the tribal areas where all these, Al-Qaeda even was thriving. There were 10 years now, billions of dollars poured in. Why the frontier area, that region, Pakistan has not changed the old laws and established the writ of the state? And in Afghanistan, the billions of dollars that the West, we from United States have invested as well. Where is the Afghan police? Why we have not invested in Afghanistan's law enforcement agencies, which are the front line? Why so often we have to go towards these militia buildings, private groups which have to fight Taliban? So the failure is, I mean, yes, India is a scapegoat. I think 70-80%, I agree with that. There is a factor, but that's an exaggerated view. The larger view is corruption of the politicians, the misuse of the international funds that go into both Pakistan and Afghanistan, which has allowed Taliban to come back into the game.
Okay, very quickly again, are you saying that because Pakistan doesn't have control over these tribal areas where the Taliban have their sanctuaries, that they really don't have control over what the Taliban does?
No, I think they don't have the control over the tribal areas, and their control with Haqqani group, for example. Yeah. What we know from various research studies is, and this is the American official reports, which say that the Haqqani group is responsible for about 15 to 20% of all terrorist activity there. Right. So let's say Pakistan has full. Even then, that takes care of 20-25% of all the attacks. The second-tier leadership of Afghan Taliban, which is operating in Afghanistan, Pakistan can't do anything about them.
Okay. Michael, those talks that took place between the Taliban and the Pakistanis, what did they really achieve? We heard our reporters say they were talking about things like prisoners, refugees. I mean, was there any political consequence there?
No, I really don't think so, just because I don't see anything coming of it because of the situation on the ground. And going back to what was said earlier, I think it's important to note that things are really starting to change in Afghanistan and Pakistan. As the security situation has gotten worse in Afghanistan, you started to have a number of Afghan Taliban who had been in Pakistan using sanctuaries there, going into Afghanistan and finding the ability to carve out new sanctuaries just because that's of the security situation. So this really suggests that Pakistan's influence over the Taliban, which in my view had always been somewhat exaggerated. It's there, but somewhat exaggerated. That said, I think a lot of the leverage that Pakistan has over the Taliban comes from the sanctuaries that the Taliban is able to enjoy, or has been able to enjoy in Pakistan. If they don't need those sanctuaries anymore, if they're able to just stay in Afghanistan, that could change the calculus. But this is not to say that Pakistan does not have any influence over the Taliban, certainly, but things are changing a bit.
Okay, we're going to take a break right now. More of our conversation about Afghanistan and Pakistan right after that. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.
The doors of peace negotiations would remain open for those in the Taliban who are ready to stop the bloodshed and lay down their arms. However, this opportunity will not be there forever. I want to make this clear that we do not expect Pakistan to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table.
That's the Afghan President Ashraf Ghani there calling on Pakistan to fight the Taliban instead of working to revive peace talks. Welcome back to The Heat. Let's get back to our panel. Ambassador, getting back to something Michael said a moment ago, does Afghanistan believe that Pakistan is providing a safe haven for Afghan Taliban fighters? And does that give Pakistan a lot of leverage over Afghanistan?
We think in Afghanistan, and I think across the board, without almost any exception, that it's not just sanctuaries, it's way beyond sanctuaries. Remember, the Taliban, somebody called it a project. Somebody wrote a big piece about it. And this Taliban project has been in existence for 22 years. And there was the pre-9/11 period where we knew where they were coming from, which madrasas they belonged to, and who were their teachers, and what was the brand of Islam that they wanted to impose on Afghanistan, which gave Pakistan, some influence. But Al-Qaeda was in the mix, and they had their plans. Post 9/11, we see for a short period the possibility that the Taliban are no longer a viable or a credible partner or a player. But by 2004, 2005, there's a realization that Pakistan thinks that it can revitalize the Taliban. And without that Pakistani, and other, not just Pakistani military and strategic decision, but also others who are part of this in the Middle East and beyond, this would not have happened. And the Taliban would not have been able. It's not just governance. Yes, governance is a problem. Corruption is a problem in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. But it's beyond that. It's something that has existed since the 1990s and even before that, after the Soviets left Afghanistan. So in my opinion, this policy continues. And unfortunately, this policy continues with no winners. Pakistan thinks that it is winning. But look at the record, look at the history. It has not accomplished a thing. It has turned 30 million Afghans as enemies. It has not invested in its own country. There are huge problems facing Pakistan. And India, on the contrary, is becoming a totally different country. And China, as well, is playing a role that is seen mostly as constructive, because it does not want to deal with terrorism. The only player that is still playing with terrorism as an instrument of foreign and security policy seems to be Pakistan.
Hassan, what do you think? I mean, what the Ambassador Samad is saying, we've heard before from the Afghan leadership. They've been calling on the Pakistanis to shut down these sanctuaries, hand over the Taliban fighters to Kabul so that they could be put on trial there. We had a Pakistani advisor, senior foreign policy advisor, Sartaj Aziz, who said he dismissed it, actually.
I, in fact, agree with the ambassadors in terms of the spirit of his argument. I think the Taliban, the whole game, the way Taliban came onto the fore and how they destroyed the culture, politics, religion, art in Afghanistan has been a terrible story, and Pakistan is to be blamed along with other members who all played a very negative role, from the Saudi money, the international involvement, the failure of reconstruction. I mean, these are all different factors which played. At this moment, to expect, I mean, I am a bit surprised about Afghan expectation as well as Western expectation that Pakistan would be able to play a very constructive role in bringing Afghan Taliban to the table. Taliban are not someone, the hardcore Taliban were beyond the realm of what you can, people with whom you can negotiate. Could you negotiate with Osama bin Laden or with Baghdadi? Same is the category with Mullah Omar, who's dead now, but with other players. To expect that with their bigotry, with their narrow-mindedness, with their worldview, that they would come on the table and accept the Afghan constitution and the new Afghanistan, which has brought hope, is a false hope. So I am basically very critical of this whole approach. And also, for Pakistan to bring Haqqani on the table, they have an indirect offer. I think they're saying, you just make us also an important player in Afghanistan, push back a little bit on India. And they have been very strongly and constantly saying this. So I go back to that regional context. There was a very famous article which I would refer you to by Barney Rubin and Ahmed Rashid, two very seasoned experts. They wrote in Foreign Policy about, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, calling it a big bargain or great bargain, I think, which was they saying, let's settle the Pakistan-India thing to a bit and then push Pakistan to do what is needed to be done in Afghanistan. So that thing, that's why I'm saying, remains. Whether it is a perception, whether it is a myth, whether it is a reality, is something else. Something needs to be done on Pakistan-India account to stop this kind of proxy war they're in.
Michael, is there still an opportunity for a grand bargain here? Because Pakistan has been working with the United States, with China, with Afghanistan to reach some kind of negotiated solution. Let's listen to what Secretary of State John Kerry had to say.
Again today, we call on the Taliban to enter into a peace process, a legitimate process, a real process that provides equal rights, protection for all Afghans, and brings to an end the violence and the suffering that the people of this country have endured for so many years.
So these internationally backed peace efforts, where are they going?
I think that peace is not dead by any means in Afghanistan, but the peace process is certainly, it's dead in the water. I think you need to restructure it. Given the mood in Afghanistan now, particularly after this relatively recent attack in Kabul, this horrific attack, I don't think there's much of a mood in Afghanistan. I don't think there's much of a mood, particularly within the political class, for any sort of peace process involving Pakistan. Now, whether it's possible to have direct peace negotiations between Kabul and the Afghan Taliban, I don't know, but I think that the Pakistan issue is what the challenge is now. And certainly a few weeks from now, a few months from now, things could change. But I think that what was said, what President Ghani said in his speech to Parliament a few weeks back, suggests that, at least right now, it's very unrealistic to think that this quadrilateral peace process could start again with Pakistan involved. I think that's going to remain a challenge.
If I may add one thing to it, I think what both of my colleagues have said, also, we must acknowledge President Ghani's initiative. He must be given credit that he tried his level best. He went to Pakistan. He was blamed by all sides within Afghanistan. And he took the initiative to going to Pakistan, to the military leadership, to everyone saying, okay, can you help? Tell me honestly, can you help? And they, on the Pakistani side, this is my assumption or guess, but calculated guess, they kept on giving him a 6 months timeline, a 1 year. We'll do it in 8 months. And then nothing happened. So they took the rug from under the feet of Ghani also. So we must give Ghani that he tried a very constructive approach, but somehow it has not worked.
Right. So, Ambassador, what were the consequences for the president then? What kind of pressure is he under now in Afghanistan to abandon peace efforts?
Well, the pressure is that he needs to show focused leadership and mobilize the Afghans in trying to create space for an Afghanistan that looks into the future, and by putting as much pressure as possible on the Taliban and denying space to the Taliban. So now I think what we are seeing is an attempt at, by public pressure mostly, in public opinion, is to deny space to the Taliban anywhere possible, to inflict as much harm as possible on the Taliban, and to make it very clear that there is no chance whatsoever for the Taliban or anyone, any group that espouses violence and bloodshed in this manner to be part of the Afghan family. And I think that this is the message that the Afghans have expected of the president to understand. He gave it a try, it didn't work, now we have to recalibrate.
Hassan, at least the Afghans are saying that if there is no adequate response from Pakistan, then they will take this, they will complain to the UN Security Council. How do you think that will go?
I think that will not go anywhere. What needs to be done is on the Afghan part. I mean, think of this. This is an era where tribalism is strong. In the south, Taliban are getting some support from some people. I mean, in some areas, there's some local not only presence, but collaboration. So Afghanistan will have to establish its institutions, and the West will have to help it build it. The Pakistan factor is once there is success story of Afghan governance happening, Pakistani influence will automatically recede.
Right. Michael, I've just got about a minute. What kind of pressure is the United States putting on Pakistan to meet those Afghan demands?
Well, I mean, the U.S. is always putting pressure on Pakistan to be doing something, and a lot of times sometimes it does. I mean, the U.S. for years has been pressuring Pakistan to stop distinguishing between so-called good and bad militants. The good militants in the Pakistan context include the likes of the Haqqani network and the Afghan Taliban. I imagine the U.S. is trying to get through to the Pakistanis in this regard, but the extent to which it can get through to them, I simply don't have much confidence in that, even after all the aid that's been provided and that type of thing. I'm just not very optimistic.
That's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. Thank you.